Try a little experiment for me. Stop what you're doing, unless you're driving, of course, and take a moment to imagine what's underneath your feet. If you're in the garden, out for a walk, a run, even sitting in an office, try to visualize what's under the surface. Think about what's going on underground, under the asphalt, the grass, under all that earth. It's a weird exercise, eh? What is down there? Roots, bugs, worms, boulders, caverns, rivers, a hidden city, a whole bunch of hot burning magma? If you could wiggle yourself down in there, it's got to be quite fascinating. Claustrophobic, yes, but somehow inviting to be down deep in the quiet. In the basin, there's a lot going on under the surface. Mountains, ice ages, tectonic shifts, and ancient volcanoes will do that to a place. And despite the inhospitable nature of what's underground, it has not stopped us from going down there. Early European settlers to the basin risked their lives in the search of fortune down below, and they found it. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the amount of galena ore extracted from the Kootenays far surpassed the value of the famous California gold rush. For those who don't know, galena ore is the main source of lead, but it's also a source of silver, tin, and arsenic. Of course, I'm talking about the literal meaning of going underground, which is, surprise, surprise, the theme of this episode, but the subject has other connotations. In the 1960s and 70s, a different group of pioneers came to the Kootenays searching for their own version of underground. Back to the landers, I guess you could call them hippies, moved to the region, as well as draft dodgers, looking for places not entirely visible to most. A subversive green economy also grew deep, kind of dark roots that brought untold millions to the region. It seems you could say going underground in the basin is second nature to many. So that's where we'll go in this episode. Let's just say we're going to get a little rock and roll. Scott, Editor-in-Chief at Kootenay Mountain Culture Productions, and this is The Headwaters, brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. Grabbing his trusty headlamp and rubber boots, we tasked writer and photographer and longtime KMC contributor Jeff Pugh to go deep as our reporter for this episode.
When you go into a cave, the safety is that light behind you. And as you become more familiar with the space, you can go deeper until you reach this space that I call the spirit of interstitial tension. And all of a sudden it turns around. It's not the light that's drawing you back to safety. It's the darkness that makes you want to go deeper.
That's a quote from American writer Percival Everett when interviewed about doing research for one of his novels. Golden, British Columbia's Katie Graham is a cave and canyon explorer, and she knows all about going deeper into that interstitial tension. She was key in discovering and then descending into Canada's deepest cave and its second deepest cave. And Jeff spent some time getting to know her. Jeff, welcome to the Headwaters Podcast. It's great to have you back up on the surface.
Hey, thanks, Mitch. It's awesome to be here.
Okay, so it looks like you got to hang out with quite the niche adventure.
Oh, man, I sure did. First, learned about Katie from the 2023 Banff Mountain Film Festival. In a film she was featured called Subterranean, showcased her journey leading the team into Bisaro Anima, which is now one of Canada's deepest caves.
Well, it's just outside of Fernie. I know this because we did a story on it in KMC a couple years ago. It's a massive, massive cave.
It's huge. It's huge. I was absolutely intrigued with her obsession with anima. She returned to it several times between 2014 and 21, spending up to 10 days in temperatures of 3 degrees Celsius and 100% humidity and darkness. In 2019, on one of her expeditions to map the cave, she broke her ankle and spent 3 days crawling and limping and climbing with ropes for over 2 kilometers to reach the entrance to the cave, where she waited for 2 days for a helicopter rescue. Katie's one of the most hardcore humans I've ever met.
Well, it sounds like it. Oh, God. Crawling for days underground. I mean, from the story and elsewhere, we've heard she's an absolute legend in the caving community. And you were lucky enough to go caving with her. Got a couple questions. Have you ever been caving before? And tell me how you were feeling before you went.
You know what? I've never been caving before. I'm not going to lie. I was terrified before I went, super claustrophobic. I just asked her not to make me cry, but it was an exciting prospect to go with like such a renowned explorer.
Okay, so did you cry and how was your date with her?
You know what? I didn't actually cry, and the day was amazing. I met her on a rainy day last June just outside of Fernie. To hike into another cave called Bisaro but Beautiful, which is a few thousand feet below Canada's deepest cave we just talked about. Bisaro but Beautiful is relatively easy to access, and I say relatively because it required a fairly grueling drive over washouts and ruts along an old forest service road, and then about a 45-minute rainy hike. Here's Katie.
Okay, we've just gotten to the entrance of Bisaro but Beautiful. It's one of my favorite things is you're hiking up and you just come around the corner and the entrance is like, whoa! And this big, massive entrance, it's so impressive. And we're here at this mid-June, and it's raining a bit, and we've got pretty high volume of water for this time for right now. So it's going to be noisy when we're in there.
Katie said the coolest thing would be if they could find a connection between Bisaro but Beautiful with Bisaro Anima, which lies thousands of feet above on the Bisaro Plateau. It's unlikely, but it's a cave, and that's what cavers do. They imagine, and then they go explore.
So we want to come back in here. So you go through here, there's dry passage, you go up a waterfall section, and then there's a sump. So you reach a pool of water, and we've dived through it before, but we want to remap it and make get a really clean survey line through here. We still don't know where this water comes from 100%. So if we map it and then you make a KML and you overlay it on Google Earth and you start to look at it, and then we can plot and look for other places to look on the plateau for the entrance.
I've been in a couple of caves in my day, and they can be, well, a little nerve-wracking. What was this cave like?
Due to the spring runoff that was happening at the time, we only made it 30 meters inside the cave before we were blocked by a waterfall. We pondered trying to pass above it, but ultimately we weren't prepared to get that soaked. Looking above the waterfall, I could see the cave narrowing and darkening. Instead of turning back, Katie suggested we hike towards a snowpack, look for another cave she'd explored before. Along the way, she explained how they find new caves.
We're looking for new caves. So usually it starts with you just like sitting on Google Earth, cruising around, looking for where's there limestone, where's there a mountain that doesn't seem to have a river coming off of it, because they're like, how does a mountain not have water coming off of it? Then you find something that looks interesting, and then you got to figure out, how do I get to it? And so then you starting in the backcountry roads maps and trying to figure out how to get there. And since it might take you a couple weekends of just like road building or something, like it'd be like an old forestry road that wasn't maintained, and then you're out there trying to fix a washout or something. And so it's like just this thing that makes you get way back in these forestry roads, trying to get to, and then it'll turn out to be nothing.
So did you eventually make it into the cave? Jeff, I want to hear about you getting super claustrophobic and freaking out.
We actually didn't. After a few hours of hiking in gumboots, it really wasn't safe to continue as it began snowing and avalanches were sliding across the valley.
What kind of time of year was this? Was it in summer?
It was June. It was a super late snowfall, and I was kind of getting a little bit freaked out. I didn't feel prepared at all in case we got lost. But Katie, she's search and rescue, so she knew what she was doing. I wasn't worried about that. But we hiked back to the truck and chatted more about the origins of Rocky Mountain caves and her passion for caving.
Around here, it was glaciers sat on the mountains and pummeled the mountain with so much water. And glacial water, cold water, can hold more carbon dioxide in it, and so you've got more acidic water under pressure that created these caves. And then that's one ice age, and then the next ice age comes and calves off half of the mountain and leaves these holes in the side, in the cliffs. And so it's totally this Ice Age story, not rain fell down and eroded the cave gradually. And so when you're caving, it's like time travel, and you're in there and just trying to imagine, like, what was it like? So it's like 250 million years ago, and this was full of water and like a whole different world. What I really love about caving is the 4x4ing, the getting the hell out there, the backcountry camping, sometimes you gotta ski to get there, sometimes you gotta rock climb to get there, sometimes you ice climb, and getting to know the same place in different seasons, trying to get, usually it's just to see what the water flow is doing, but the snow level and it's just like a reason to keep coming back to the same place and just really feel like you know it.
Wow. Caving can give you a taste of everything. Sounds like it's more than just a hobby for Katie, though.
Yeah, totally. She's an accountant by trade, but has taken some time off to pursue caving. She's starting a company that makes cave suits.
I want a cave suit.
Yeah, I think they're going to be incredible. They're like a coverall for cavers. And currently she's the president of the Alberta Speleological Society, a volunteer organization open to anyone interested in the sport and the scientific study of cave exploration. This is just not wandering through mountains and getting lost in a cave. It's as much science as it is adventure.
So when we find a cave, the ethic is to survey it the first time you go. So you don't just like tromp through and run through and do, oh, this is cool, and just check it all out. We call that scooping. So to map caves, you set one station, and usually you start it like at the drip line. You take a GPS location, say this is where it starts, and then the next spot, between that you take the distance, the azimuth, and the inclination. So the distance, the compass bearing, and then how much up and down it goes. And you take those readings, and then you take the next station, do that again and again. And so it's just kind of trigonometry that you put it all together.
Most of us are terrified of getting stuck in speleology. I mean, a cave, or by high water in a narrow passageway. Horrifying. Or we get overrun with claustrophobia. I mean, how does Katie deal with all of these gnarly things?
She thinks fear is a healthy thing, and by slowly pushing your comfort further and further, you end up going, deeper. You ease into it, she says. And most importantly, you have to stay calm.
So, I mean, okay, so you start out by something that's not, that's just like crouching, and then you get into something that's crawling, and then you'll be something that's squeezing. And, I mean, I didn't start really comfortable with being stuck, but now I would say, like, as long as I can move my big toe, I'm not stuck. So, I mean, if you get yourself into a thing, you got to get yourself back out of the thing. I got into a passage in Bisaro Anima, and it's like fish scales. So, like, on the way in, you're going with the fish scales, but on the way out, you're going against, like, the way the rocks were flaked was kind of the fins are sticking out. And I was like, I can't crawl back through this thing. And so I had to take off all of my clothes. So you take off your boot and push it through, and then you like taking off your oversuit and your helmet and pushing it through, and then crawl through this thing and then get dressed on the other side.
I remember Katie being interviewed in 2018 when a Thai boys soccer team was trapped in a cave in northern Thailand. What expertise did she bring to that situation?
Yeah, she was interviewed that previous spring because she'd been trapped for 4 days in a Mexican cave that had flooded.
She'd been trapped for 4 days in Mexico, too?
Yeah, incredible. So she shared her perspective on what physical and mental challenges the boys must be facing. During our chat, she recounts an effort she made to escape the flooded cave.
So it was a canal passage. So on the way in, you're swimming with you've got all your stuff waterproofed in a bag, and you're swimming along this canal, and then so your head's in air, and then then the water rose and that canal filled up with water. So I was at the edge. So if you lean back and lift your foot up to the ceiling, you can feel like when your toe breaks through that water barrier and it becomes more buoyant. So then you know where the air pocket is, and so you take a deep breath, and then you go to where your foot was, and then you get yourself into this little air bell. And then you lean back again and reach with your foot and try to find another air pocket. and you hold your breath. And so I did this, and then on the third air pocket, I came up and I got my eye open, but I couldn't get my mouth out of the water, so then I had to close my eyes and put my lips on the ceiling and take a breath. So I think that pocket was like the size of a lemon, and that's when I was just like too far, and so then I reversed. So I thought it was all good, and then I guess that was like, nope, that's my limit. Okay, go back.
Listening to her describe her experience is just mind-blowing. As always, Katie stresses that staying positive, keeping your wits about you, and focusing on surviving are key. Even as she recalls her near-death experience or breaking an ankle in 14 places 3 days into Bisaro, she has this childlike wonder about what she's doing, even when she's suffering. For Katie, caving has so many benefits, despite its inherent suffering in comparison to many outdoor adventures.
Yeah, caving is not a glamorous sport. You don't, if you go on a hike or a rock climb, you get to the top. And caving isn't really like that. You just get to the bottom, and it usually just gets muddier and worse as you go. So it's more about pushing your personal limits and then coming back for more later. And it's like getting to know yourself along the way, but then also that you bond with people and make really good friends along the way doing it. And then there's this citizen science component that collecting data by itself is boring, but it's seeing the long term, once you have been collecting data for a decade and actually putting together as something useful is incredible.
Jeff, if any of our listeners are crazy enough to get into caving, how can they get into it?
Katie recommends just going out and exploring known caves, then find other cavers to hook up with. Look for caves when you're driving along Forest Service roads and hike up to take a look. Get excited about it.
And don't forget your cave suit. You mentioned Katie's not working as an accountant now, so she can pursue caving. What are her immediate plans?
Well, as you'd guess, probably just more caving. Katie Graham just wants to get better and go deeper towards the darkness.
I'm most excited. So my goal right now is to dive Bisaro Anima deeper, farther. So a lot of this summer is going to be focused on diving, cave diving, just getting better and getting more comfortable doing a thing by myself in a place where no one else can help you.
Now we go underground again, but this time it would not have been anyone's choice to go. During the 1950s and 60s, at the height of the Cold War, underground bunkers were constructed across Canada to shelter up to 8,000 public officials in the event of a nuclear war attack. These bunkers were commonly found in secure locations in federal buildings like in North Bay, Ontario, Debert, Nova Scotia, and Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. In the Kootenays, one was built in Nelson's post office. Few people knew Nelson had a bunker until 2013, when the Nelson Museum and Art Gallery began offering private tours. Since then, museum staff have been working to preserve and prepare the space for public viewing. After many years of planning, the Nelson Cold War bunker is open to the public as a permanent museum exhibition and heritage site. Our intrepid underground reporter, Jeff Pugh, has more on that.
At the height of the Cold War era, Canadians were generally concerned about the possibility of nuclear conflict. To prepare for potential attacks, the Canadian government, under the direction of Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, created almost 50 bunkers, nicknamed Diefenbunkers, throughout Canada to protect government officials so the bureaucrats could continue to run whatever remained of an apocalyptic Canada. The main federal government underground bunker was built in Carp, Ontario, not far from Ottawa. It was 100,000 square feet spread over 4 stories. Jean-Philippe Stien is the Nelson Museum archivist and collections manager. He gives Cold War bunker tours and explains why they were built.
So we're talking about 1950s, 1960s, the real threat that there could have been nuclear weapons, probably from the Soviet Union, hitting targets perhaps in Canada. Maybe missiles coming over, maybe bombing aircraft coming over. And there was a real fear that we'd have World War I, World War II not too long before. Maybe we'd have World War III with nuclear weapons and actually Canada being targeted.
Presently, Nelson's Cold War bunker is an eclectic mix between a museum, a heritage site, and an audiovisual space. In 1957, it would have looked eerily different. Imagine if the world above was in the middle of flames and fallout. The local government would have gathered underground to stay connected with leaders across Canada. Astrid Heyerdahl is the former executive director of the Nelson Museum and Art Gallery. She describes its original layout.
When it would have been the bunker, we have 3 dormitories, 2 for men, 1 for women. The women's one is significantly smaller. And we have water tanks. So we have a room that has 3 gigantic water tanks that would have theoretically sustained the individuals living here with enough water. And then we have some storage space that they would have used. We have a radio room they would have used here as well. And then the mechanical spaces. Shower, which were decontamination showers. So the large open space that we're standing in right now, which has office desks for us to work, it has the kitchen that is still here from that era, and then the museum space that we've created, this would have theoretically been enough living space, working space for several individuals within the government.
It would have potentially been a very busy place. It was designed so that government, well, more specifically civil defense, could keep working and communicating with other bunkers across Canada, and there were about 50 of them. Several theories exist about why the tiny town of Nelson was chosen to receive a Diefenbaker bunker. Astrid explains a few possibilities.
Diefenbaker often came to the Nelson area for fishing. And we also have a photograph of him visiting Nelson in front of actually the Nelson Museum, which of course was City Hall at the time, with a homemade sign. Children had written in marker, "Welcome Mr.," not even Prime Minister, "Welcome Mr. Diefenbaker." So that is certainly one theory. The other theory, of course, is that in Trail there was hard water. That was a part of the belief, too, that the reason why there was a bunker here in Nelson was that it was far enough from Trail, that if Trail were to be targeted as a result of its contributions to nuclear armament, that Nelson would be far enough away to care for the politicians of the region.
And who were the lucky ones selected to survive in the bunker if the country was attacked? It must have been a difficult scenario for politicians and government representatives to fathom.
The families were not on the list. The men, primarily, were on the list. Families would stay at home and perish. The list we find fascinating as well, and we've created some programming around that, in that the list was primarily, white men. That was government at the time. And so when we're talking about, as a contemporary museum space that's so active and holds social justice within the core of who we are, it feels very odd to have a space that would have been designated for white men. It's a very exclusive, elite space where people were literally not invited, where people's lives were considered more important than others.
And this has had a profound impact on Astrid and the work she does.
And it's why I've dedicated my career thus far to museums, archives, and gallery, because they have the capacity to create space for decolonization. They have the capacity to talk about social justice in different kinds of ways, where when you step into this space, a 1960s Cold War bunker, you're transported back in time, not with nostalgia, but with an understanding of how can we look at this bunker space and improve our lives moving forward.
Few musicians know the sounds and scene of the underground quite like Joey Shithead Keithley, the frontman of D.O.A., Vancouver's legendary punk rock band. Formed in 1977, Their story is a raucous anthem of defiance, resilience, and blistering energy, screaming for social change. 46 years later, Joey's the last founding member still with D.O.A., and he's still performing all over the world. Here's some music trivia for you. Joey's current D.O.A. bassist, Mike Hodsell, and drummer, Paddy Duddy, both live in the Kootenays. Joey reflects on the band's roots and how they've never strayed far from their original goals.
It was completely underground. We started playing punk rock in 1977, and we heard about the Ramones, and we thought, oh, well, these guys are really strange. All the songs sound the same, right? Okay, like when you hear new music, and we played our first show like mid-77. We worked our way onto a bill, and we only knew 3 songs. We borrowed the gear from these guys. And when they realized that we started playing the same 3 songs again, we got into this wrestling shoving match with them. They're trying to get their gear back, but that's a whole other story. Punk rock was really underground, except for bands like the Ramones, the Clash, Sex Pistols. But the rest of us, like Bad Brains, Black Flag, D.O.A., we were completely underground. And the thing that made punk rock go overground was finally they started playing Nirvana, which was kind of punk rock. And then you had Green Day came along, Rancid. As soon as they went oh, Nirvana's cool, we'll play that. It wasn't totally punk rock, but it was 50-60% punk rock.
After decades of working, Joey has hardly come up for air, never venturing far from what inspired D.O.A. to make music in the first place. We'll give him the final word.
The most interesting acts are the underground ones. And those are the ones that are still along my philosophy, where they're political. They'll do fundraisers for food banks. They'll do anti-war stuff. They'll do stuff to help people who are in poverty or in distress or homeless and stuff like that.
That's our podcast on Going Underground. A big thanks to Jeff Pugh, our reporter for this episode, all the way in from Kimberley. You can also read more about these stories and see some great pictures from Jeff at our website, headwaterspodcast.com. The Headwaters is created by the good folks at Kootenay Mountain Culture Productions and brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. To find out more about all the good things the Trust does when it comes to supporting people and communities in the Columbia Basin, visit ourtrust.org. I'm Mitchell Scott. Thanks for listening.